So Bert Kreischer has type 2 diabetes.
Folks, it is official. Bert has type 2 diabetes.
And I think that Ryan Sickler should be the new and permanent host of Two Bears. So let's talk about it. So if you're not caught up, then Ryan Sickler filled in for Bert Kreischer in the most recent episode of Two Bears. And although at a first glance this may not seem like a big deal, I think that Ryan being featured on this episode of Two Bears could have huge ramifications for the future of the podcast and maybe even YMH Studios as a whole. And I mean this in the best way possible. But first, I have to set the scene. You see, I think that this episode of Two Bears has to be one of the best episodes that I've seen in a long time. And one of the main reasons for this was the chemistry between Tom and Ryan. I think that Ryan brings a different dynamic to the show that we don't usually get with Bert, and things felt really fresh, and Tom and Ryan seemed to bounce off of each other extremely well. Not just in this podcast, but I also noticed the great chemistry in other podcasts that they've been on, such as the Honeydew and Ryan Sickler's new podcast called The Way Back. And you may be thinking, why is any of this even important? Well, I'll tell you why it's important, because watching this episode with Ryan had me thinking about the chemistry or lack of chemistry between Tom and Bert in recent times. While I was watching this episode, I felt like I got a completely different version of Tom. A version of Tom Segura that actually looked like he was enjoying himself and having fun. A version of Tom that actually looked like he enjoyed being in the company of his co-host. And you guys can let me know down in the comments below if you noticed this too. But this episode with Ryan made me feel like I was watching an older version of the podcast. And I never really noticed this until I started rewatching some old episodes with Bert. And in my opinion, when I look at Tom's behavior, his mannerisms, even just the overall sort of vibe that he gives off, I mean, for me, it's night and day. And it was at this moment here where one of the potential reasons for the downfall of Two Bears occurred to me. And it was the lack of passion and enthusiasm on Tom's part. And when you really think about it, I don't think you can blame him. Now, I'm not saying that Tom absolutely hates the podcast and wants nothing to do with it. I'm not saying that at all. But something just feels different. It doesn't feel the same as it once did. And I think that lack of passion could be put down to one thing. And that one thing is Bert Kreischer. Now, don't worry, because this all links back to Ryan and how he can play a pretty big role in reviving Two Bears, but just bear with me for a second. You see, the relationship between Tom and Bert is something that's questioned quite frequently. Now, I don't think that Tom hates Bert, but I do think that Tom finds Bert extremely difficult to work with at the best of times. If Bert isn't cutting in, if he's not giving Tom the opportunity to make a point, and all of this just keeps building and building and building and building, for Tom it gets to the point where he just ends up mentally clocking out of the conversation. And I feel like we can visibly see this in some of the episodes. You have to remember that these guys bank their episodes. And now listen, I am no producing or podcasting expert, but Tom and Bert are probably in that studio recording episodes for hours, and having to put up with Bert's antics for an extended period of time can be pretty exhausting. So when Tom is confronted with these issues of interruptions and Bert cutting him off, it can be pretty exhausting. I think he sees the podcast as a check the box activity. It's just another thing on his to-do list that he needs to get done. And obviously if Tom isn't as emotionally invested as he could be, he's going to put less effort into it, and if there's less effort, then that results in a worse product. And guys, I have to be completely honest with you here. I don't think you can blame Tom. I mean, it must be pretty hard for him working with Bert for all those hours. I would love to see somebody actually calculate the amount of time or the percentage of time that Tom is actually talking during these episodes. I mean, you guys can let me know your guesses down below, but my guess is probably around like 20 to 30%. And even then, that's probably a little bit high. But in all seriousness, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a reason for the recent episodes just feeling a little bit stale. Now, if you remember from earlier, I mentioned that Ryan being on the podcast could have huge ramifications for the future of Two Bears. And what some of you may think was just the ordinary bog standard guest appearance, which you'd be correct in thinking, I actually think that there is a huge opportunity here. And I think that opportunity is bringing back a large majority of the fans that have left. After you're done watching this video, I encourage you to watch this episode with Ryan and immediately go to the comments. And what you'll notice is a large majority of people protesting for Ryan to be a permanent guest on the podcast. And I think that this is the solution to some of their problems. Ryan is likable, a good conversationalist. He knows how to make a podcast engaging, and most importantly, he knows how to have fun. And I think if Tom pounced on this opportunity to have Ryan on the podcast more often, I think that maybe in the next couple of months or maybe years, we could see Two Bears do a massive U-turn. Now, Tom is a very smart man and he's very business savvy, and I wouldn't be surprised if he has noticed the extremely positive reception for having Ryan on the podcast. And I do wonder if the thought of having Ryan as a more frequent guest bear has actually crossed his mind. Now, although Ryan becoming a permanent or semi-permanent guest bear sounds great, there is one problem with my theory, and that one problem is Bert Kreischer. You see, where is Bert gonna fit into all of this? Because we have to think realistically. Tom isn't just gonna boot Bert off the podcast anytime soon, but I think I have the solution. If I was at YMH and I was in charge, I would have all three bears. I would have Tom, I would have Bert, and I would have Ryan. And I'd have all of them in rotation. Maybe one week we go with the normal Bert and Tom. Then next week we can swap over to Tom and Ryan. And then the week after that, we could have an episode with Ryan and Bert. And then if you're lucky, we could get an episode with all three of them together. 3 bears in 1 cave. That works, right? That works. I think it does. But I think this would help keep things very fresh, not just for us as the viewer, but for all the 3 bears if Ryan was to join the group. I think it's a pretty decent idea. Now, some of you may suggest that it would be better to have Ryan in now and just to get rid of Bert straight away. But I'm going to tell you why I don't think that's the best course of action to take. Because I think if you throw Ryan in there straight away, I think we then run the risk of things becoming stale yet again, and the whole move being completely counterproductive in the first place. I think it would be better if Ryan was to slowly bleed into the Two Bears ecosystem, I guess. You know, if he was to kind of slip in under the radar without us knowing, if they were to kind of drip feed Ryan and let him sneak in without us even noticing, I think that would be the best way to go about it. But the chances of this happening are just so slim. However, I still think it is fun to think about. Now, I'm sure that many of us would love to see Ryan become a regular on the podcast, but I'm interested in what you guys think. Do you agree with my theory? Do you disagree? If so, why? Leave it down in the comments below. And I just want to take a quick moment just to say that I do wish Bert a speedy recovery. Although he gets sick and tired with his antics on the podcast, listen, I'm not the type of guy to wish ill on anybody, so I hope he gets that sorted out soon. But thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.